Hola y bienvenidos a todos. Estoy muy contenta estar aquí porque tenemos un grupo de ponentes, 4 mujeres, todas formidables, vais a ver. Y hablamos en una mezcla de inglés y español, nuestra en inglés y María Cristina en español. So a very warm welcome to everyone, and I think it's going to be a fabulously interesting conversation with 4 truly formidable women as we discuss the F word. And the F word usually alludes to a kind of expletive, a curse word. And in this case, the F word we are discussing is feminism. And while it might not be quite the same as the other F word, it is also on occasion been used as a term of abuse. The title of today's panel, Many Feminisms, immediately alludes to the kind of polyphonic nature of the word, feminism, and the act of being feminist. It is invested with so much symbolism and is often encoded in one way but decoded in quite another. And I think that's why a lot of young women today sort of almost distance themselves from the word, perhaps seeing it as being anti-men or anti-merit on occasion. We have a panel that is, from different geographies around the world and from different disciplines. But I think that there is a universality when we talk about the experience of being a woman, and I hope that that comes out today. And one of those sort of universal aspects is that when we talk of women, the body really does come to the fore. So much is vested in women's bodies, in their disciplining, in their fetishization, in their shape, how the bodies are covered, how they are uncovered, in their breasts, in their hair, in their feet. So I would like to start really with Tishani Doshi, who is a poet and a novelist, but also a dancer. And in that sense, the body and its rhythms, the way that bodies occupy space, has been something that you have consistently dealt with in your work. I recently read a piece you wrote in the literary magazine Granta that begins with, I quote, "I have many poems with breasts in them," and it ends with, "If you are a woman in India, no matter what size your breasts, you better make sure that they have teeth." So tell us a little bit about how you explore the female experience in your work and why you focus so much on embodiment.
Okay. Thanks, Pallavi. It's lovely to be here with all of you. That line was influenced by the great scholar and poet and translator A.K. Ramanujan, who wrote about the village, the teeth goddesses, the tooth goddess versus the breast goddess, the more benevolent goddess. And as a dancer, the kind of work I was doing was also very much to do with Tantra, the idea of the female principle, the idea of everything originating from a femininity. And the person I worked with, Chandralekha, she believed in a kind of femininity in all bodies, not just in female bodies, but she worked with men also in her choreographies. And she always used to say, "I don't care who came, it just happened that that day 2 boys came or 2 girls." And so this idea of nurturing that idea of the feminine in the body. And I think as a writer, a lot of my work has been trying to reconcile, I suppose, the constraints, the difficulties, the wonders of this anatomy that I happen to carry around as a woman. So the powers, the dangers, and all of that, and trying to hold these contradictions, and in some way in the work of poetry and dance, working towards a reclamation of power, because you're constantly feeling a sense of threat or danger to that said body, you know? And so it's really the beginning of the work is trying to navigate through the world as a woman, and then through the work also escaping the body in some way. That's the ultimate, that feeling of freedom from the body, which is beautiful, but also poses a sort of a threat in some way, or danger. So I think that's really the crux of my work, and I'm always sort of moving between those ideas.
Just a very quick follow-on, so you could maybe expand a tiny bit on that. You've said that you cannot imagine being a dancer without being a writer, or a writer without being a dancer. Can you sort of explore the connectivity between those two a little bit more? Why is that? Why do you feel that way?
In a sense, again, because the work is beginning with the body, and I learned about being a writer through a dancer, even though I became a dancer only at the age of 26, which is quite advanced, let's say, and I had wanted to be a writer before that. But I think every concept that I have as a poet, whether it's the idea of breath, or whether it's the idea of time, or whether it's the idea of slowness, or any kind of rhythm, all of that I've learned from being a dancer. And I think that those elements of how to take that sense of time in the body, language in the body, sound in the body, and then bring it into the page, into the sound of poetry and fiction, has really been the process for me. And it works in both ways, because there are elements of language that then you impose upon the body as well. But I would say that it begins very physically within the body.
If I can move on to Namita now. Mythologically and historically, the position of women really globally has been quite dichotomous. And I think in Europe, as much as in other parts, in India, in Europe you have this famous Madonna whore dichotomy, where women are either sort of venerated and put on pedestals and seen as these virginal mother figures, or derided as prostitutes. For the audience over here who may not be as familiar with Indian mythology and its quite complicated positioning of women, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how women in Indian myths have been represented. And secondly, I know that you have recently been working on sort of recentering women in retellings of Indian myths. So tell us a little bit about this recentering and what might be called feminist retellings, really, and what impact do you think this is giving women of mythology a voice might have?
Well, the women in Indian mythology don't really need a voice, because they are there around us in every corner, every pebble, every stone. Every tree has a tree goddess in it. I mean, as you know, in India we have billions of gods. I don't know the exact number. We'll look it up in Google if you like. And of those, more than half are women. And each of those women represents a different aspect. The ones I am currently working on is something called the Dash Mahavidyas. The Dash Mahavidyas are a very mystical, very difficult to access set of 10 goddesses, which between them give us a sense of the lifespan of a woman and gives it respect. It begins with the Bal Tripur Sundari, who's the young child, pre-menstrual child, and her role in life as the form of strength which is about to emerge. And then there is the Tripur Sundari, who is the beauty of this, and so on. I won't go through all 10 of them, but the ones that fascinate me most are the last 2 or 3 of them. There is Bagula Mukhi, who can give you stambhan, who can make your enemies quiet and absolutely accede to your will. Now, these aspects of the goddess are power aspects. Half the goddesses are Ugra and half are Shant. The Shant ones give you blessings and operate smoothly within the environment of society. And the Ugra ones take on passionately with blood and gore if needed to defend what they consider is righteous. Now, there are no goddesses in any other religion who are still active. The Madonna is there, but she's there in a different role as the mother of God. And in the Greek pantheon, there used to be 12 deities, of which 6 were originally women goddesses. And then beginning with Hestia, the goddess of the household, one by one they were dethroned and men took over. But in India, these goddesses are powerful in daily life. We think that Indian women are very demure or that they are very suppressed. But actually, within them, there's this core of being brought up with the strength of these goddesses. And when it needs to, it comes to them as a cultural memory almost. So I was working on a goddess called Sita. And Sita was the one who had been most unjustly treated within the Indian cultural memes. She had been exiled for no fault of hers and still deified. So we did a book that questioned the basis of this, and writers from the left and the right agreed that this had to be corrected in Indian myth if Indian women were to own up to asserting their rights, which she did, but not enough so. So I use mythology to try to reawaken the messages of strength.
Yeah, I think that, many people in Spain have asked me this question. I'm sure many in the audience will have this. It could be quite confusing what you're saying, that you have these very powerful women in representation, in history, in mythology, but yet, India's is a deeply, deeply misogynistic society. So how does one sort of resolve that?
I think one of the places where the misogyny really began was the book I did called In Search of Sita, where the earth goddess, who was married to Lord Rama, who is still the most powerful political and social figure, was unfairly exiled. And somewhere there, I think the seeds of that misogyny really, because I think that misogyny is embedded not only, as in the book we find, in Hindu people in India, but in Sikhs, in Christians, the myth of Sita still carries weight. And, but at the same time, her husband is still referred to as Jai Siya Ram. Sita comes before him, so it's all very confusing. Everything about India is so contradictory, I will not attempt to explain this. The other goddess we did was Radha, and Radha was not the wife of Krishna, but his mistress. And she is still worshipped deeply. So it's trying to bring logic into how I use Indian myth. It will only confuse you until you give up in frustration. So I won't even try. All I'm saying is that I try to communicate, to learn myself about the Indian goddesses and how it can be debated and opened up a little. And the women in my novels have nothing to do with the women in the mythology books.
Thank you. Maria Cristina. I have heard many people in Spain say to me that feminism no longer really has a place in Spanish society because it's something that was needed in the past, but that men and women are now already equal, and that India should think about feminism because of dowry deaths and gang rapes and deep-seated violence and misogyny. But Spain has a huge number of women in public life, in politics. The World Economic Forum just brought out its global gender rankings, and Spain is in the top 10 countries in the world for equality between men and women. But yet I know that you, in your work, have explored feminism in different aspects. And I'd love to know what you would say to people in Spain who say that feminism is no longer necessary in this country because it's kind of old-fashioned and is already, society is already ready to move forward.
Bueno, thank you for the invitation to celebrate this festival y congratulations. me voy a hablar en español, que para mí es más fácil, la pregunta es difícil, entonces me voy a mi idioma. A ver, bueno, Pallavi, muy interesante. A ver, como todas las conquistas del feminismo son muy frágiles, y la historia de las mujeres, no del feminismo, sino de las mujeres en el espacio público, de las mujeres desde las sufragistas inglesas y de las primeras que han ido conquistando a oleadas los derechos, no solo los derechos para votar, sino los derechos civiles también, y el derecho a caminar solas por la calle y tener cierta seguridad y no ser vulnerables en el espacio público, el derecho a vestirte como quieras, como te dé la gana, sin que haya una policía de la moral que te vigile. Todos esos derechos que están ahí, que no están escritos en ningún sitio, pero que forman parte de la convivencia y tal, bueno, creo que son frágiles. Entonces, aunque efectivamente en España la imagen es que se ha avanzado muchísimo, se ha avanzado muchísimo en legislación sobre igualdad. Por ejemplo, tenemos un permiso de paternidad y maternidad exactamente igual, en temas de... Bueno, algo tenían que decir.
She was approving, yeah.
Bueno, bien, ciertamente en España todo esto se ha conseguido y es bastante importante porque permite, por ejemplo, en temas laborales, de conciliación, vida laboral y familiar de las mujeres trabajadoras, pues tener permisos igualitarios y todo esto son avances muy importantes en temas de igualdad. Pero luego hay un imaginario social y está la cultura simbólica y sigue estando el problema, pues, del patriarcado de alguna manera y el machismo que continúa ahí y que está ahí, que está en la religión y que está en cierta inseguridad y que está en que, por ejemplo, a la mujer su carrera profesional le va a costar más, tiene que tirar para llegar también a lo que tú dices, tantas mujeres ministras o tantas mujeres en el espacio público han tenido que sufrir el doble, han tenido que pelear el doble y sigue siendo complicado. Entonces, en ese sentido, pues eso es lo que hay todavía.
Gracias. La otra Cristina, the other Cristina. Cristina, you've been a foreign correspondent for close to 4 decades now, and for a lot of this time you have been also reporting on wars. And, everything about war in some ways it's like kind of coded in a masculine way, right? When we think of soldiers and armies and weapons and drones and so on, they have these very masculine undertones. But yet you've said that you think that women are the greatest heroes of war. Why is this? Could you expound on that a bit?
Thank you. Estoy muy contenta de estar aquí. Thank you very much for coming. I just wanted to say something before I answer the question, which is while we are sitting in this absolutely beautiful setting with this dappled sunlight and peahens and peacocks, 80% of girls and women in Afghanistan cannot go to school, cannot go to work. And I just think that we are in 2024, and to think that there is a country in the world, imagine if your daughters were not allowed to go to school or to study, and just how terrible that would be. So, and it's 1,000 days yesterday that has been the case. So I just wanted to remind people of that. In answer to your question, I think when people think about war, and unfortunately we're doing this session at a time when there's more conflicts in the world than at any time since the Second World War. I spent a lot of my time in Ukraine in the last couple of years, also Israel, Gaza. We can't get into Gaza, frustratingly. But I think when you outside think about war, you think about young men fighting, and most of the military histories have been written by men and focus on the men fighting. But whenever a war is going on, there's millions of people still living in those countries trying to get on with life. When I go to Ukraine, they still have literary festivals, amazingly. I spoke at one. People were getting married, people were having children, people were going to work. And the people that are holding all of that together is almost always the women. And so what really fascinates me in war is much less the fighting, but the people that are trying to keep life together as all hell breaks around them, and you don't see any statues to them, but to me, they are the real heroes.
Yeah, but looking at it from a slightly different angle of your own work as a woman in a male-dominated field. I mean, the war correspondent, the foreign correspondent for a very long time was really, male. And I mean, I myself have been a foreign correspondent for the last 25 years. And when I first began, I was in Beijing in China. And I remember sometimes meeting, especially Indian men in Beijing when I would interview them. They would ask me like a question which was very strange, which was, what are you doing here? And I used to be, I'm interviewing you. Like, this is like, I work for a newspaper and I'm here to write a story about whatever you happen to be doing in China. And they would keep saying, no, but what are you doing here? And I finally realized they were not asking me what work I was doing, but physically what I was doing in a place that was not, according to them, my place, that I had kind of transgressed I was in the wrong place as far as they were concerned geographically. And if I happened to say to them that I was married and my husband worked in China, suddenly everything sort of made sense. And they'd be like, why didn't you say that? It made sense to them suddenly. I fit into their picture of the world, the correct ontology. So, I mean, you've been doing this for longer, and how has that changed for women as foreign correspondents, when you cover war? What kind of changes have you seen over the last 3.5 decades?
Sure. I mean, I've had a very similar experience, and particularly after 9/11, interviewing Islamists quite a lot who won't look at you as a woman. And in fact, if I was there with a photographer who was male, they would address all the answers to my questions to the male photographer, which was very annoying. People so when I started out, there weren't that many female war correspondents. It was a very male field, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons I focused so much on what was happening to women. But, there were women correspondents that we owe a debt to, people like Martha Gellhorn and Lee Miller, who were actually reporting here at the Spanish Civil War. And in fact, last week when we had the 80th anniversary of D-Day, very moving ceremonies at the Normandy beaches, on those D-Day landings, when 156,000 men landed, there was one woman, and that was Martha Gellhorn, a female journalist, who'd smuggled herself into the toilets of a hospital ship. So I think we owe a debt, sort of, those were the real women pioneers. But things have changed a lot, and now, often there are more women when I'm covering than men. But because I've focused so much on women, and I talked just now about how women to me are the real heroes, of course there's also a dark side of what happens to women in war, and that is the use of sexual violence, rape as a weapon of war, which sadly we see in every conflict, and we've seen again in Ukraine, we've seen in Israel, Gaza, and happening in all sorts of places around the world. So, and it is a war crime, but like rape generally is very unprosecuted. It's very difficult to get accountability. And the fight for justice is extremely difficult. You may remember 10 years ago the Yazidis who were captured, thousands of them, and taken by Islamic State fighters to be sex slaves. Also the girls taken, the Chibok girls in Nigeria who were taken from their school in the middle of the night by Boko Haram fighters, also 10 years ago. There has not been a single prosecution for any of the girls that were taken in Nigeria. We're talking about tens of thousands. And in the Yazidis case, there's only been one prosecution, which was actually in Germany. And most of those women, or actually 2,600 women and children are still missing. And others that have been rescued are deeply traumatized and are still mostly living in terrible conditions in camps in Iraq. And all the promises that were made by the international community about never again, it's 10 years on, and this is still the situation.
Yeah, so I guess sort of the weaponization of rape is something that is really persisted through all the changes that we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, rape is the one crime where women are made to feel that they did something wrong, and it's very difficult to prosecute in our own societies. You've had a case here in Spain recently with the 12-year-old Romani girl where the man who raped her was acquitted after impregnating her, and on the basis that this was a sort of cultural thing. I'm not sure how anybody could think that impregnating a 12-year-old girl is a cultural thing. But, you know, we really have to do better. We need to do better in our own societies, but we also have to focus much more on this as an issue in war, because otherwise, at the moment, perpetrators are getting away with it and not paying a price. One militia said to me that this is the cheapest weapon known to man. It's cheaper than a Kalashnikov bullet. We need to start making people pay the price for what they're doing.
Maria Cristina, if you had to identify one single area where Spain really needs to make progress, what feminists in Spain should really be focusing on, what would you identify that as?
Pues fíjate, en España, como en muchos países de Europa, el norte de Europa también, Suecia, tenemos un problema de violencia de género bastante importante. Pues eso demuestra que hay mecanismos institucionales, juzgados de violencia de género específicos solo para tratar este problema. Pero en España el tema de la violencia de género, pues si te digo que estamos en una muerte de mujeres cada 2 semanas o así, y me parece una estadística muy alta para un país, bueno, para cualquier país me parece muy alta, ahí no hay temas cualitativos. Pues hay paradojas así, también pasa en Suecia, que es un país avanzadísimo en temas de igualdad. Lo que viene a demostrar que creo que viene a demostrar que es que el patriarcado es una forma de dominación transversal que atraviesa cualquier país, cualquier clase social y que sigue ahí y que forma parte de un imaginario colectivo ancestral que se transmite por la educación. Tenemos que hacer mucha pedagogía todavía y que continúa y no es tan fácil. Sí.
And we'll open up to questions very soon. I think we only have a few minutes left. But before we wind up, perhaps you could talk a little bit about your book, Paro, which was your debut book, which has just been reissued in a 40th year anniversary edition. And I think it's really interesting because it was such a transgressive novel when it first came out. And I think there were people in India who even called it pornographic at the time, simply because it centered female sexuality. So tell us a little bit about the book, its reception then, and how you see things having changed 40 years down the line.
Well, I meant it to be quite funny, but people took it to be pornographic. And
maybe you could just in 2 sentences.
It's about
what
this
is it?
woman called Paro, who did whatever she wanted with her life. And this person called Priya, who was observing her, both with a fair amount of jealousy and a fair amount of admiration, because around the world there are women who do what they want, who have the courage of the opportunity, and those who can't, and secretly want to, but sometimes can't, whatever it is. It's a complicated and very funny novel. And when it came out 40 years ago, there was a lot of stress around in Delhi, and it did well in the rest of the world here and there, but in India, people turned on me, and I was married, and I was clever enough to dedicate it to my mother-in-law, so that went all right at home. But it's really a sort of revenge to find it issued 40 years later as a Penguin modern classic. Because, I was so abused for that novel that for 10 years I couldn't write another book. So it just shows that times have changed. And I meet younger people all the time, and they look at me with grey hair and they say, "You wrote that book?" And I say, "Yeah." So I'm so proud. But it just proves that, well, something about sexuality, something about comedy, something about human life, stories continue. But as do the stories of rape, from ancient Roman epics to everywhere. I mean, rape is the easiest weapon across, is the oldest narrative of. So I mean, all I can say is that here's to my novel Paro, and thank you for remembering it.
I've just been told we have 15 minutes more, so I'd like to just come back to Tishani quickly before opening it up to questions. And Tishani, maybe you could just speak a little bit generally to the kind of contradictions of the experience of being a woman in a country like India, because I think that is something that really fascinates people here. Namita had alluded to it when she was talking about mythology as well, and how we have these very strong women characters, but at the same time we have this very deep-seated misogyny. So there really does seem to be like, it's difficult to square that circle when we talk about the experience of being a woman in India. And so if you could, explore that a little bit.
I mean, I touched on that with the breast and tooth goddesses, that idea of the idea of a country that actually enshrines within its imagination a worship of the female, and that is very present in India, and it's around everywhere. Every road shrine, every tree, pebble, as Namita says, and it's very felt in through layered time. So there is, it's not a question of feeling any disempowerment because of being a feminine. You instead feel that power of the feminine. But I think when Christina was talking, I'm reading her book at the moment, and it's impossible to read in long sections because it will make you weep. It's very, very difficult to read these stories of things that are done to women and girls. And I think for me, one of the things is, how do you reconcile within art, within something that is essentially a beautiful form, poetry, dance, how do you reconcile this scale of violence in that? So that you're being contemporary, so that you're not just talking in an echo chamber, but you're actually living in the world and saying, hey, I'm moving around and these are the things that I'm being bombarded with. So yes, beautiful, yes, powerful, yes, wonderful. But what about all this, And I think for me, a watershed moment was Nirbhaya in December 2012, when Jyoti Singh, a young woman, was gang raped on a bus in Delhi and later died. And I think this incident changed a lot of things in India. It changed legislation, it changed laws around sexual assault and rape. And then you would have thought that in that wave of being able to talk about it, being able to change legislation, seeing young people on the streets protesting, saying this is not who we want to be, this is not the country we want to live in, that all these years later we would see this profound change. And in fact, day after day after day, it's the same thing. This violence is unrelenting. And I think that as an artist, as somebody who's trying to negotiate all this, it's very difficult to try to find something that you can work from that is not being totally squashed by it, because the weight of it is really, really oppressive. And I think my work is about trying to think of possibilities of reclamation, of recovery through language, through body, and thinking essentially of feminism not as I am a woman and I am okay in my privileged life, but feminism is always about the collective. It is about how do we imagine a better society, a more just and equal society, not for just myself, but for everybody. And so through the work, it's really about saying these stories of women, of girls, they don't have to be in India. They can be in Afghanistan, they can be in Gaza, they can be in anywhere, And how do you then write into that so that the poem or whatever becomes something that can be absorbed somewhere else. So Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods was the poem that I wrote after that, and the poem that has traveled and found people. And in a way, that's the only sort of work that can be done, which is to sort of mend this gap, to make a bridge between this horror and between a beauty that awaits, and I think that's what I'm trying to do.
I just wanted to say that as she spoke about this rape case of Nirbhaya, I was thinking of Nirbhaya. And I think it's paradoxical that women are actually doing very, very well in India, in academics, in job, these things. And that is, in fact, provoking more and more violence, because centuries of men feeling so entitled and so privileged. A lot of the violence has to do with a new wave of anger And rape is one of the easiest ways of expressing that anger. And it is frightening, but at the same time, I think it's wonderful that women are getting in their way within how much they can in the situation. It's their strength that's provoking the anger and the violence.
Christina, quick response.
I started off mentioning Afghanistan, and I just wanted to say something about what happened there, because I think it's relevant. You might remember when the Taliban were removed in 2001, the Western leaders all talked about wanting to free women. President Bush even, made it as if that was one of the main objectives to free women. And I think one of the huge mistakes that I saw happen in Afghanistan, and I've seen this happen elsewhere, is there was an awful lot of focus afterwards on women's rights. Lots of organizations went there, set up gender awareness classes, set up women's bakeries, set up women's groups, which was all great. And one day I went to see a girls' football team play, and I was a bit surprised because they told me to come at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I was thinking, why would they play at this time? It wasn't like it was incredibly hot or anything. It turned out they were playing at 4 in the morning because they were playing in secret. And after their game, the male guards on the school where they were playing came up to me and said, these girls are prostitutes, they're whores, this is disgusting that they're doing this. And I started to realize there is absolutely no point making women aware of their rights if you don't also talk to the men. And that's what happens over and over again.
On that excellent point, I think we can open this up for a few questions. We have another 10 minutes. We have Punita at the back there.
Thank you for... Is this on? Hello? Thank you for this amazingly riveting session. So patriarchy, feminism, it's about power, about sense of agency. 10, 15 years ago, a phrase we used to hear was the glass ceiling. And I want to just ask the panel, have you all encountered the glass ceiling in your individual careers? And would you like to just say how you managed to break through, or did you not manage to break through the glass ceiling?
Is there anyone who wants to take that in particular? Go ahead with Christina.
Vale. Pregunta muy interesante. El techo de cristal está ahí porque la maternidad y el rol de la maternidad de la mujer es ineludible. Ese rol que llevamos como una mochila en la espalda, pues te obliga de alguna manera a tener menos disponibilidad profesional en tu trabajo y tu día a día en el trabajo, ¿no? No tienes tanta disponibilidad para salir a viajar, para comer fuera de casa todos los días, que es cuando se cierran a lo mejor en la empresa privada los grandes contratos y los viajes que te permiten nuevos clientes. Estoy pensando en la empresa privada. Pero en la pública igual, por ejemplo, en la Universidad Española es muy llamativo que el 60% de catedráticos son hombres y a las mujeres les cuesta mucho llegar. Les cuesta, no es que les cueste mucho llegar, es que llegan, pero llegan en un porcentaje menor y llegan cuando han tenido menos hijos o no han estado casadas, han tenido más tiempo para investigar, para escribir, para publicar, para ir a congresos, en fin. El tema de la maternidad es un freno en las carreras profesionales de las mujeres y eso produce techo de cristal. Sí.
So the motherhood tax in many ways. Would anyone else want to respond to that? Maybe Christina?
I mean, I want to say something which I think is quite shocking. I've been a foreign correspondent for 36 years. I have never had a female foreign editor. I have only ever worked for men, even now, which... And, men and women look at things in a different way and choose different stories, prioritize different things. And I think that says something about the state of newspapers in the UK. I also think, sadly, women are not always each other's best friends. When women do lead an organisation, they don't always help other women. I come from a country which actually I think is one of the very few places on earth that's had 3 female prime ministers, which actually hasn't been a great experience, particularly the last one. But, you know, that hasn't led to sort of more women feeling that they too can become prime minister, so in a way that you might have thought it would. So I think we need to look out for each other a bit more sisterhood sometimes.
Okay, Namita, very quickly.
There was just something I found in this business of glass ceiling, that women they may work harder, they may be better at what they do, but they are usually delegated to the back room to do the back end girls, the people who are helpful, always helpful. I personally just never bothered about anything, so I never encountered it personally, because I just ignored anybody who, I did what I wanted. And the young women I mentor or I work with, I find they use the word sorry more than anybody I know. And they say sorry for anything. And all I say to them is, please use this word carefully. Anything. Oh, I'm sorry I didn't take the call. Oh, I'm so sorry I wasn't there. Women are conditioned to say sorry. And the thing is, they have to stop saying sorry, except when they are meant to be saying sorry.
So I, about 2 years ago, was actually working with a German boss, and this was a journalistic job, and I was invited to a panel on, I can't remember, China, India, something like that, and he came and he monitored what I was saying, and afterwards he called me up to give me feedback, and he actually said the things I've only read that people said, and I never thought that he would say it, which was, you sound too aggressive and you need to smile more. So I actually had this said to me by a German boss 2 years ago, but yeah, so. Any other questions? We still have time for maybe one more. Yes, Dinesh, over here in the front.
Hi, thanks. It's a wonderful session. You know, most of the problems come from us having stereotypes about how men and women are. I mean, the whole feminism is based on the fact that it's anti-men to some extent. But what I'm very happy about now in the current generation is this whole growth of this concept of transgender. Because we, the older generation, do not like this concept. Somehow we are anti, whereas the younger generation, Gen Z, is accepting it very strongly. Why I'm saying I'm very positive, and I want your response to it, is that what transgender does is breaks the stereotypes of men and women among the younger generation. They don't look as a man as being somebody masculine, strong, etc., but can be a female version of it. And a female also can also be a male version of the same. So I'm very positive that the older generation, which have these strong stereotypes, which actually cause all these problems of rape, violence, what Namita said, that now there is a kickback, or so, how do you say, they're hitting back at the openness that women are showing by doing more of violence, more of rape. I somehow feel the Gen Z and the future generations will be much better if we allow this whole concept of transgender, the fluidity of gender, not allowing stereotypes of men and women to actually stay in our mind. So if we can do that, we will find there'll be really a change in society, which we need, because laws are not going to make any difference. So just wanted your response to this.
Anyone wants to take that gender fluidity, transgender, how that sort of plays into it?
I think all of us are men or women at different phases in our lives, and we all have feminine and masculine, and every marriage has 2 men and 2 women in it. But and while I'm supportive of equality, visibility across the whole spectrum of gender identities or LGBTQIA+, but at the same time, and this is not a popular opinion, but it does have some resonance here and there, is that in certain areas, especially sports, I think it can be problematic, because transgender identities, so those things can't be ironed out by legislation. I think each of us has a right to adopt a sexual and gender identity that we want, and it does open out a lot of the hurts and angers. And it's not as though men are not raped. equally within the.
Do you think that the focus on transgenderism actually helps the feminist cause or not? Like, how does it play into the feminist cause?
Well, it depends on how the feminist cause handles it. Because I don't like isms, and although I wrote this title, Many Feminisms, but I don't like the isms. And that's why I resist some forms of feminism, because I think it's sort of ossified and stratified in a different time. And there are so many layers. So it's ultimately many isms, but if I find that gay men are often more sensitive to the feminine than often not. I mean, I have no answers to what you're saying. It's still in process, I think.
No, I mean, I think you're right in that there is a move towards dismantling the structure of what we perceive as gender, as there has been about sexuality and the bodies. And, you know, we always have to look at this through the prism of intersection and through privilege and through background and class. And I think the idea is always towards achieving freedom. That is the ultimate, to live in your body, however you define it, in a society where you feel free, whether you identify as a man or a woman or trans. And I think like that is the goal. And it is true that we are actually in this moment now where those structures are being challenged, and also where language is being changed to accommodate this. And I think that's wonderful, because we have to always think of expanding rather than narrowing. I feel like that's the way that you accommodate in a society, not by saying, no, it's either this or that, but saying, okay, expand it. So, all right, we'll have to learn a new word, and it's okay, we can manage, you know? And so I think that this is an exciting moment. We'll see how it goes, and we'll see how that then affects, I think, the things that feminism has always been concerned with, which are the questions of, you know, reproductive rights and violence against bodies, and whether that actually helps or whether that's just talk and it continues and we just have different names for it. So we'll see.
So with that, I've just been informed that time's up. I want to thank all our 4 formidable panelists for a truly interesting discussion. Everyone, all of us have books. We're going to be signing them at the back. Please do come and have a look at the books as well. Thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you.